The crown is a beautiful lie, and Anne Boleyn wore it like a noose. That's how it begins. Not with a coronation. Not with a kiss. But with the slow turn of a knife behind silk curtains. She was not born to rule. She wasn't royal or even loved, at least not at first. She was the second daughter of a minor nobleman. A shadow in the background of court life. Quiet. Observing. Smiling with secrets she hadn't even discovered yet. But when Anne Boleyn looked at the throne of England, she didn't see gold or glory. She saw a mirror, and in it, a woman unafraid to become myth. Henry VIII was a king tired of his queen. His obsession with legacy, sons, heirs, power that would live beyond his rotting flesh, consumed him. Then came Anne. Sharp-tongued, graceful, unreadable. She didn't seduce him with her body but with her refusal. She withheld what every woman before her had given freely. And he, the king, crawled. What followed was not a love story. It was war. A war between desire and duty. Between church and state. Between one woman's ascent and an entire kingdom's collapse. To be queen and had to break an empire. She became the spark that tore England from the Catholic Church. A queen made not by divine right, but by destruction. Priests called her whore. Courtiers called her witch. And yet there she stood, crowned, radiant, triumphant. A symbol of feminine rebellion in a world ruled by men. But the higher you rise, the more enemies you leave behind in shadow. And thought she was playing chess. She didn't realize she was the pawn, the bishop, and the queen, all on a board soaked in blood. Every smile she gave was measured. Every word dangerous. Behind her eyes was a mind too fast for the age she lived in. And the whispers, they multiplied. That she laughed too loudly. That she used sorcery. That she controlled the king with her eyes. They never hated her for what she did. They hated her for daring to do it. Because Anne Boleyn wasn't just a queen. She was a threat. To tradition, to obedience, to every man who believed power should be inherited, not earned. And in England, threats don't live long. They say power is intoxicating. But for Anne Boleyn, it was poison served in a jeweled cup. From the moment she wore the crown, the court sharpened its knives. Whispers turned to accusations. And the very people who once bowed at her feet now watched for a stumble, a crack in the facade, a reason to erase her. She had given Henry a daughter, Elizabeth. A child with fire in her veins and destiny in her blood. But she had not given him a son. And in the Tudor world, a queen who birthed only daughters might as well have birthed rebellion. And knew the court. She knew the men who played loyalty like a game. She watched them flatter, scheme, betray, all behind velvet and wine. She had learned their language. She could wound with a glance. She could dance through danger. But in her palace of mirrors, even she could not see where the blade would come from. It came from everywhere. From Henry's eyes, which once adored her and now looked past her. From courtiers who feared a queen with ideas. From a world that had no place for a woman who wanted more than to kneel and breed. They accused her of adultery, of incest, of treason. The charges were grotesque, fabricated. But no one cared about truth, not really. They cared about order. About putting Anne Boleyn back in her place, or beneath it. She stood trial in a hall filled with men who'd once sworn loyalty to her. Their eyes told her everything. The verdict was already written. Her words were calm, controlled. But beneath her stillness was something terrifying, dignity. Even as the storm closed in, she did not beg. She did not weep. She held her spine straight, her voice steady. Because if they were going to make her a villain, she would wear it like a crown. And Henry? He watched it all from a distance. The man who once tore a country in half to touch her skin now signed her death warrant like it was just another parchment on his desk. No ceremony. No grief. Just silence. And was no longer his queen. She was an inconvenience. But she would not vanish quietly. Even in chains she glowed. Even condemned she haunted. Because deep down, England knew. It was not justice. It was fear, dressed as law. The morning of her execution was unusually bright. Birdsong drifted over the Tower of London as if the earth itself refused to mourn. And Boleyn walked to the scaffold in a gown of deep crimson, the color of martyrs and queens. Her hair tucked neatly beneath a linen coif. Her face, serene. Not defiant. Not broken. Resolved. She had asked for a French swordsman, not the clumsy axe of English justice. And Henry, ever the magnanimous tyrant, granted her that one final mercy. But make no mistake, this was not mercy. This was erasure. And climbed the scaffold like she was walking into a final portrait. Every step was calculated. Every breath sacred. Around her stood nobles, guards, traitors in noble clothing. And yet it was she who looked most royal. The crowd was silent. Not out of respect but awe. They expected a monster. A witch. A seductress undone by her own ambition. What they saw was a woman who refused to be afraid. Her final speech was brief, gracious, almost gentle. She praised the king. She spoke of forgiveness. But between her words there was something else. Fire. Not rage. Not bitterness. Truth. She had played the game. She had loved dangerously. She had dared to ascend a throne not meant for women who dreamed too loudly. And for that she would lose her head. The swordsman stood behind her, silent. He whispered to his assistant to fetch the sword, a trick so she wouldn't flinch, and knelt, eyes forward, hands trembling but steady. In that moment she wasn't just a woman. She was every silenced voice, every ambition punished, every truth burned in the name of order. The blade moved through the air like a whisper, and then silence. No scream, no sound, just the soft thud of a crownless body collapsing into history. They buried her in an unmarked grave beneath the chapel stones. No monument, no honor, just dust. But legends don't stay buried. Anne Boleyn would not be forgotten. She would become the ghost at every royal feast, the shadow behind every queen, the whisper in Elizabeth's rise. The proof that power, once tasted, leaves behind more than blood. It leaves behind memory, a warning, and a vow. You'd think that was the end. A queen betrayed, a swift execution, a name scratched from royal records. But Anne Boleyn's true legacy began the moment her head touched the straw. Because from her bloodline, from the very daughter Henry once dismissed, rose a monarch who would define an age. Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, the last Tudor, and the woman who ruled alone without husband or heir for 45 years. That's the irony the world tries to forget. Henry killed and for not giving him a son. But it was her daughter who became England's greatest ruler. And not by accident. Elizabeth grew up knowing her mother had been executed by the very crown she now wore. She understood power, not as a gift but as a weapon. A game. A mirror that could crack at the slightest misstep. She wore her crown not with joy, but with armor. And behind her every move stood a phantom. Not as a mother. Not even as a memory. But as a symbol. Of what happens when women rise too far. And what happens when they refuse to fall. The Tudor court tried to erase Anne Boleyn, but history doesn't work that way. You don't erase fire by scattering the ashes. You don't silence a voice by cutting off the head. And had changed the structure of England's faith. She had outmaneuvered cardinals, kings, and queens. She had stood at the eye of a storm that reshaped the monarchy itself. And in death she became myth. The dangerous kind. The kind whispered about in stone corridors. The kind schoolchildren aren't told the full truth about. The kind that lingers in portraits never quite smiling. Eyes following you through time. And Boleyn wasn't a victim. And she wasn't a villain. She was something far more dangerous. A mirror. To every man who feared losing control. To every woman who wondered what might happen if she dared to want more. And that's why they killed her. Not because she committed treason. But because she committed audacity. Because she dared to rise, and refused to kneel. Even now her ghost doesn't rest. It lingers, whispering behind the throne, watching. Reminding every ruler who sits there. Crowns are heavy. And queens, real queens, are never safe. The story of Anne Boleyn isn't just history. It's a warning wrapped in silk. A fire disguised as beauty. She was brilliant, flawed, and human, but that's not how power saw her. Power saw a disruption. And the world always punishes women who don't know their place. What makes Anne's tale so haunting is that it still echoes. In boardrooms. In bedrooms. In every place where a woman's ambition is mistaken for arrogance. Where her intelligence is met with suspicion. Where her silence is demanded in the name of decorum. And didn't want to be a wife. She wanted to be a force. She didn't seduce a king to wear diamonds. She bent an empire to change its soul. She shattered a church not for lust, but for leverage. And in doing so, she became the most dangerous thing a woman can be. Unforgettable. They tried to erase her with ink, lies, and steel. But and slipped through their fingers like all things too wild to tame. You can still feel her presence in every woman who refuses to apologize for being intelligent. For being loud. For wanting more. She taught us something that's uncomfortable to admit. That change doesn't come peacefully. That justice wears many masks. And that sometimes, the villain in the story is simply the first one to say no. Look closely and you'll see her everywhere. In the woman fired for speaking up. in the girl mocked for dreaming too big, in the silence that follows every accusation that feels too convenient. And Boleyn lives in that silence. She stares back through cracked glass, reminding us that truth is rarely welcomed and often killed, but never buried. Not truly. Because when a woman dares to rise, she becomes more than a name. She becomes a fracture in the story the world tells itself. She becomes legend. And legends don't die. They linger in the bloodstream of history, waiting for the next woman, the next fire, the next voice too dangerous to be allowed. So if you ever feel the world turning cold, the eyes sharpening, the floor shifting beneath you, remember Anne Boleyn, and whisper back to the darkness. You can kill the queen, but the crown remembers.